The smell of medicine mixed with the faint aroma of boiled lentils filled the small mud brick room. Outside, chickens scratched in the dry earth and voices from the village echoed faintly. Inside, time had slowed. Noor lay on the charpai, eyes half closed, breathing uneven. His chest rose and fell like a struggle. He had been sick for weeks now, but he hadn't stopped watching her. Safia, his wife, who sat beside him every day, holding his hand and brushing the sweat off his forehead. She always came at sunrise. She would gently open the creaking wooden door and walk in with a warm smile and a bowl of food. Noor's eyes would brighten, even if only a little. He couldn't speak much. The fever had taken his strength and blurred his thoughts, but he could still feel. And in that weakness, he found strength in her presence. Every soft word she whispered felt like medicine. Every touch of her hand felt like hope. But Safia's eyes told another story, a quiet story hidden behind practiced concern and a trembling lower lip she had mastered in the mirror. She placed the bowl on the wooden stool, stirred it slowly, and brought the spoon to Noor's mouth. "Eat this, John," she said softly. "It will help you get better." Noor opened his mouth, trusting her like a child, swallowing without protest. But her heart wasn't here. She had spent the previous night in someone else's arms. It had started months ago, when Noor began coughing heavily and missing work. He had once been the strong one, tall, respected, the kind of man other men greeted first. But illness had carved a hollowness into him. His weight dropped, his eyes lost their sharpness, and his shop, once buzzing with customers, now stayed closed. The first time Safia felt something shift was when Ibrahim helped her carry water from the well. He was younger, stronger, and his compliments came with a hunger Noor had lost. She resisted at first, told herself it was just sympathy. But the way he looked at her, how he asked about her day, how he joked that she deserved more, it all lingered longer than she admitted. And then one evening, when Noor had fallen asleep under the neem tree after a walk, she followed Ibrahim to the back of the mosque. It started with whispers. Then it turned into stolen moments. Eventually, it became something deeper, or so she told herself. Now, here she was, feeding her husband soup she didn't even taste, speaking words she didn't mean. "You'll be better soon," she said, wiping his lips gently. "The doctor said your strength is coming back." Noor blinked slowly. A weak smile formed on his lips. He believed her. Why wouldn't he? Safia had never lied to him before, or maybe she had and he never noticed. Her kindness was the same as always. Her voice, soft. Her touch, careful. Only the eyes were different now. But Noor was too sick to see that. Safia stood up to rinse the spoon in the wash basin. Her hands trembled a little. Guilt had started to slip in, not enough to stop her, but enough to sting. She had promised herself she wouldn't think about Ibrahim when she was here. But the lie was hard to maintain. Every gesture she made now felt like a performance, an act she had to play for the village, for Noor, even for herself. His mother, Amma John, peeked through the curtain. "Beta, I can watch him if you're tired." Safia smiled.
"No, Amma.
"I'm fine. He needs me now." The older woman nodded slowly, but didn't leave. She watched the way Safia moved, the way her eyes flicked away when Noor whispered something. Amma's instinct, sharpened by decades of motherhood, caught the subtle cracks. Later, after Amma left and the sun lowered, Safia lit the oil lamp. Noor tried to speak, his lips dry. She leaned in listening. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice barely there. She kissed his forehead gently. "Always." She meant to sound sincere. She practiced it 100 times in her head. But in that moment, when her lips touched his burning skin, something inside her cracked. Not regret, not love, but something close to fear. Not fear of getting caught, but fear that maybe, just maybe, she had gone too far. Noor drifted back to sleep. Safia sat quietly beside him, the room wrapped in silence, her mind replaying the lies she'd spoken all day. The morning sun filtered weakly through the cracks in the mud brick wall, casting long, pale streaks across the small room. A pot of lentils boiled softly over the fire outside, but inside, all was quiet except for his cough. It was deep and wet, the kind that rattled the lungs. Ion lay on the wooden bed, his back slightly arched, his eyes half closed. The fever had worn him down over the past few weeks. His arms looked thinner than they should have been, and his skin had begun to lose its glow. She entered the room softly, with a bowl in one hand and medicine in the other. Her steps were careful, almost loving. Anyone watching would say, "What a devoted wife." But there was a flicker in her eyes, something detached, something calculating. "Take this," she said gently, sitting on the edge of the bed and lifting his head. Her fingers brushed his cheek with what seemed like affection, but her eyes remained cold. "The doctor said these will help." Ion opened his mouth, obedient like a child, and swallowed the pills without question. She held the cup to his lips next, and he drank slowly. The water was cool, refreshing. He closed his eyes again, trusting her completely. She smiled, but only with her lips. Inside, she was somewhere else, not in this hut, not with this man. Her thoughts were miles away, back in the tall grass fields near the river, where someone else waited for her. Someone who knew her truth. At night, while Ion slept, sweating under the thin sheet, she would step outside under the pretense of fetching more water or feeding the animals. But the truth was far from that. There were no goats to feed, no chores left undone. Only stolen minutes with a man who wasn't her husband, a man who had convinced her that she deserved more than village life, more than a sick husband who couldn't earn, couldn't stand, couldn't even kiss her without coughing. But during the day, she played the role perfectly. She crushed the herbs. She checked his temperature. She changed his bedsheets. And when his mother visited, that old woman with the sharp eyes and sharper questions, she acted like a daughter-in-law sent from the heavens. "Amy, he's eating a little now," she would say. "He smiled today. That means the medicine is working." The old woman always squinted at her, as if trying to peel back the skin and see what was hiding underneath. "God sees everything," she had once said, placing her hand on her son's forehead. The younger woman had just smiled and nodded. The truth was, the medicine really was working. The doctor had prescribed the right combination of antibiotics and painkillers. Ion's strength was returning slowly. He had begun to sit up on his own. His words, though faint, were returning. He would sometimes ask her to tell him stories, like she used to in the early days of their marriage. And she did, with a voice sweet as honey and lies dressed in silk. Each time he asked her if she loved him, she would answer, "With all my heart," and hold his hand a little tighter, even though her heart beat louder for another. But lately something had begun to shift. One night, as she stirred his soup with care, he whispered, "Why do you cry at night when you think I'm sleeping?" The spoon clattered into the bowl. She turned sharply, but his eyes were already closed again. Maybe it was the fever speaking. Maybe not. She told herself to stay calm, to be careful. The game had gone on too long now, and she couldn't afford a mistake. If Ion got well and started asking real questions, what would she say? That all the nights she had spent beside him were out of duty, not love? That she had already chosen a life without him, was just waiting for the right time to disappear? The next morning, she increased the dose slightly, just a little more of the sleeping herb the village healer had once shown her for nerves and restlessness. Not enough to kill, just enough to keep him quiet. Keep him from remembering too much. Keep him in the haze where her lies could still sound like truth. He took the tea without suspicion, smiled at her with dry lips, and said, "You're the only reason I'm still alive." Her smile twitched. "And you're the only reason I haven't left this house." He laughed. Weakly, but he laughed. Only she knew that wasn't a joke. The room was quiet except for the rhythmic ticking of the old wall clock and the occasional rattle of the medicine bottles on the bedside table. A dim yellow bulb hung from the ceiling, casting soft shadows on the cracked cement walls. On the bed, wrapped in a thin cotton blanket despite the warm evening, lay Imran, pale, motionless, and weak. Sitting beside him was Zubaida, her dupatta neatly pinned, her eyes calm, her voice a whisper that seemed soaked in affection. "You'll be fine, Imran," she said gently, placing a cool, wet cloth on his forehead. Doctor said it's just weakness. You'll get better. Imran tried to smile. His lips parted slightly, dry and cracked, barely holding the words he wanted to say. But he trusted her. After all, hadn't she always been by his side? Bringing him soup, helping him sit up, reminding him to take his medicine. What more could love look like? But Zubaydah's hands trembled slightly when she reached for the spoon. She quickly masked it by tightening her grip. Inside, her thoughts weren't calm. They were racing, chasing shadows, hiding truths, and weaving new lies by the second. Because the medicine was real. The food was nourishing. The care was visible. But the truth? It was sharp, dangerous, and buried deep under her soft smile. Earlier that afternoon, she had received a message. Just one line. He's lasting longer than we planned. She didn't reply. She just stared at the words, her heart thudding in her chest. She quickly deleted it, but the words stayed, echoing in her mind. Imran shifted in bed, groaning softly. She leaned closer, cupping his hand. I'm here, she whispered. Always. And she was. Every day, morning to night, sitting by his side, bathing him when he couldn't move, reading old prayer books to him. Even his own mother had stopped visiting this often, confident that Zubaydah was the kind of wife any man would dream of. But she wasn't. Behind those kind eyes were layers, years of resentment, secrets, and a heart slowly pulled toward someone else. Someone who had promised her a new life, one that didn't smell of sickness, sweat, and a crumbling mud house. The room's silence was broken again when Imran coughed, hard. She helped him sip warm water, gently rubbing his back. He closed his eyes in exhaustion, and she carefully wiped his lips. You need to sleep, she said softly. Tomorrow, you'll be stronger. Imran gave a slight nod. His hand gripped hers weakly, and she didn't pull away. But as he dozed off, she stared at him, really stared, at the man she once loved. The man who once brought her mangoes wrapped in newspaper after a long day at the fields. The man who laughed loudly, hugged tightly, and believed in dreams even when the world had nothing to offer. But that man was fading now, reduced to a shadow of his past. And her heart? It wasn't here anymore. Down the road, behind a broken gate and a rusting bicycle, was a house where another man waited. A man who had promised her silk clothes, city lights, and a life free from dust and disease. A man who now sent her updates, warnings even. Don't let him recover, the last one had said. She had deleted that one too. Her fingers played with the edge of Imran's blanket as he slept. Her mind wandered again, to a night months ago when she had first told a lie. It was small. She said she was going to the bazaar. Instead, she had gone to meet that other man. One lie turned into two, two into 10. And now, here she was, feeding a man, caring for a man, while silently wishing he wouldn't wake up one day. But guilt had a smell, a weight. Every time she helped Imran take his medicine, her hands felt heavier. Every time he smiled at her gratefully, she felt a tightness in her chest that no words could describe. A soft knock came at the door. She froze. It was his mother. Zubaydah stood, smoothed her dress, and opened the door. Kai's hi Marabeda? The old woman asked, eyes full of worry. He's resting, Zubaydah said, smiling. A little better. She let the woman in, knowing full well that she had only told part of the truth. Because yes, he was resting.
But better? That part was the lie.
And yet, in the soft light of the room, Zubaydah looked like a devoted wife, selfless and brave. His mother placed her hand on Zubaydah's shoulder. Allah Tomajarda, she whispered. Zubaydah smiled again. But inside, she felt something crack. As the old woman sat beside her son and prayed softly, Zubaydah stepped outside for a moment, leaned against the wall, and looked up at the night sky. One star blinked above, alone, faint, but still there. Just like her guilt. The nights in the village had become quieter since Omar fell ill. The once lively man, who used to sing softly while repairing tools or lighting the lanterns around their small clay house, now lay still in bed. His breath was shallow, and his voice, once deep and commanding, had grown faint. Every word he tried to speak came out dry, cracked, and incomplete. And yet, beside him, she sat. Zainab. She adjusted his blanket, wiped his forehead with a cloth dipped in lukewarm water, and smiled at everyone who came to visit. To the neighbors, she was a picture of devotion. A good wife. A pillar of patience. They spoke kindly of her when they left. "She hasn't slept in days," said the woman next door. "She's always there by his side." But no one heard what Omar heard when the visitors were gone. "Why don't you just get better?" she whispered once, too low for anyone but him to hear. Her fingers gripped the edge of the blanket, pulling it tight under his chin, almost choking him. "You think I'll spend the rest of my life wiping your sweat? You should have died already." Omar tried to speak, but no words came. Only a weak moan. His eyes pleaded, but Zainab had mastered the art of smiling through cruelty. He wanted to believe she didn't mean it. Maybe it was the pressure, the fatigue. Maybe she was hurting too. But the next morning, when she stood outside their door telling a neighbor how Omar begged for her comfort, he realized something terrifying. She wasn't exhausted. She was performing. And everyone believed her. As the days passed, Zainab began telling stories. Little ones at first. To the shopkeeper, she said Omar asked her not to bring his brother around anymore. He says his brother brings bad memories. To the imam's wife, she confessed Omar didn't want visitors. He cries when people see him weak. None of it was true. But with Omar unable to speak, who could prove her wrong? His mother came from the next village one afternoon, her silver hair wrapped in a scarf, her hands trembling as she held her son's face. She noticed how thin he had become, how his lips cracked from thirst. "He needs soup. Something warm." "Zainab, why isn't he eating?" she asked, her voice brittle with worry. Zainab smiled. "He refuses food when you're around, Alma. I've told you before." Omar's mother looked into her son's eyes. He blinked hard, trying to signal, trying to scream without sound. But Zainab stood behind her, gently tugging her arm. "You've traveled far. Rest now. I'll take care of everything." That night, after his mother left the room, Zainab leaned in close to Omar's ear and whispered, "You should thank me. I'm protecting your dignity. No one wants to see what you've become." Omar's heart pounded, but his body remained still. Then she began limiting visits. She told the village elders that Omar was too delicate for guests. The truth was, every visitor meant a risk, a chance someone might notice the trembling in her tone, the flicker of contempt in her eyes. Omar's best friend, Karim, insisted on visiting anyway. One afternoon, he arrived with dates and honey and sat quietly beside the bed. "You still fight, brother?" he asked softly. Omar blinked. Slowly. Twice. Zainab stood in the doorway, arms folded. He doesn't respond much these days. But Karim noticed the flicker in Omar's eyes, the slight twitch of his hand. He leaned closer. "Just blink once if you're not okay." Omar blinked. Once. Zainab laughed. "You two always had your silly codes. Let's not play games now." Karim hesitated. He placed the jar of honey on the table, stood up, and touched Omar's shoulder. "I'll come again tomorrow." After he left, Zainab boiled the honey until it burned, poured it out in the yard, and told Omar, "No more visitors bringing poison to your mind." Omar's illness didn't worsen, but neither did it heal. He remained caught in a cage of silence, while Zainab sharpened her performance for the world. She cried in public, wiped fake tears on her dupatta, and whispered about how hard it was to care for a man who no longer speaks, no longer feels. What no one saw was how she stared coldly at him when no one was watching, how she timed his medicine late, fed him bread that had turned dry, and left water just out of reach. She told her friends that the medicine was expensive and she was struggling to afford it. They donated without question. But Omar noticed the boxes of sweets she bought for herself, the new gold bangle on her wrist. She was using his weakness, not just to build sympathy, but to build a life where she stood tall, admired, even pitted while he shrank into a quiet shadow. And there, in that shadow, Omar began to wait, not for healing, but for one moment. One witness. One voice stronger than hers. One truth to cut through her lie. No one suspected her. Why would they? She was always there, sitting by Samir's bed, gently stroking his forehead, whispering soft prayers, crying when his cough grew worse. To anyone who walked through the door, she looked like a broken-hearted wife watching her husband fall apart. But she wasn't broken. She was careful. Samir had always trusted her. Even now, as he lay in bed for the third week straight, his eyes sunken and skin pale, he still reached for her hand. "It must be the fever again," he murmured, his voice a weak croak. She nodded, eyes watery. "Yes, John. The doctor said it's just a stubborn infection." The infection. That's what they called it. But no one could figure out why the medicines weren't working. The blood test showed elevated white cells, sure, but not high enough to explain his slow, dragging decline. The antibiotics made no difference. And still, he wasted away, not with a bang but slowly, quietly. The doctor visited again that Thursday. A young man from the city clinic who carried 2 mobile phones and wore his stethoscope like a necklace. "Is he eating?" the doctor asked. Zoya nodded, looking concerned. "Yes, I feed him myself. He barely swallows, though." The doctor adjusted Samir's foreline and frowned. "His vitals are irregular again. If this doesn't stabilize, we'll have to admit him. I don't want to scare you, but something's not adding up." She gasped, perfectly timed, and covered her mouth with trembling hands. "Oh, Allah, please help him." But inside, her thoughts were racing. If they took him to the city hospital, someone would ask the wrong questions. A lab tech might notice what she'd been doing. They might test what was in the food. Or worse, Samir might tell someone what he suspected. Because even in his sickness, he was starting to notice. Last night, he had whispered it. "Zoya, did you change my medicine? It tastes different." She had smiled sweetly. "No, John, just your taste buds acting up." But it wasn't taste. It was fear. Zoya wasn't a cruel woman by nature. But she was desperate. And desperation, like sickness, can spread through the veins like poison. Months ago, she found out about the insurance. Samir had named her as the sole beneficiary, a small payout, nothing huge, but enough to start over. Enough to leave the slow, suffocating village behind. Enough to build the life she wanted with someone else. There was someone else. But he didn't know the full plan.
Not yet.
Each night, she crushed half a tablet of something Samir was never prescribed, something she bought in secret. Not enough to kill outright. Just enough to weaken. Enough to confuse the doctors. Enough to make the symptoms look like illness, not intention. She stirred it into his lentils, his soup. She fed him with a spoon, wiping his lips and whispering, "BS ek," or "just one more." And he obeyed. Because he trusted her. Samir's mother visited the next day, a stubborn old woman who never liked Zoya much. "He's losing too much weight," she snapped, lifting the blanket from his legs. "I told you to feed him milk and bananas." Zoya's jaw tightened. "Ammi, I'm doing everything I can." "He won't eat." "You always say that. Maybe if you weren't always crying, you'd feed him better." Zoya's eyes flashed for a split second before she quickly turned on the tears. "I haven't slept. I'm trying so hard. And do you just accuse me?" Samir stirred. "Ammi, please," she's helping. That shut his mother up for the moment. But the old woman kept glancing at the kitchen, sniffing the food Zoya prepared, asking too many questions. Zoya knew it was time to act faster. That evening, she prepared his food with the same soft hands. A little more powder this time. She blew gently on the spoon, like always, and guided it to his lips. He swallowed, weakly. But halfway through the meal, he stopped. His fingers trembled. He looked at her, eyes glassy. "Zoya, something's wrong." She tilted her head, wiping his mouth.
"No, John.
"You're just tired." "No," he said, his voice suddenly clear. "You did something." I feel it." She froze. His words had more weight now, they weren't slurred. Was the medicine wearing off? He tried to sit up, but his muscles betrayed him. His body shook violently, and he collapsed back into the bed, gasping. Zoya stood there, holding the spoon midair. Downstairs, someone knocked. Loudly. A neighbor. Maybe the doctor again. She didn't move. Samir's breathing slowed. His eyes rolled back. Panic swept through her chest, but she didn't run to him. Not yet. She just stood there, unsure whether to help him or let it happen. The knock came again, louder this time. She placed the spoon on the tray and adjusted the blanket over his body. "Sleep, John," she whispered. Then she walked to the door, slow, calm, and opened it. The room was quiet, except for the labored breathing coming from the bed. Samir lay still, his body too weak to turn, his eyes flickering open only when her voice spoke close to his ear. "Don't worry, John," Zoya whispered softly, brushing a damp strand of hair from his forehead. "I'm here. I'll always be here." Not like her. Samir blinked slowly. His lips parted, but no words came. Only a shallow breath escaped him. Zoya leaned in closer. "She came again today, you know. Said you looked worse. Blamed me. Can you believe that?" She paused, then added with just the right tremble in her voice, "She said I wasn't feeding you properly. That I wasn't taking care of you." She dabbed at his forehead with a cool cloth, her hands gentle, her face calm. No one watching would have guessed her words were not of comfort, but quiet warfare. Samir's mother, Alma, had been a presence in his life since the beginning, constant and protective. Maybe too protective. Zoya always felt the weight of that gaze on her, as if the old woman never truly accepted her as the one worthy of her son. But now Samir was weak, vulnerable, and Zoya's words were the only ones he could hear. She said, "You need a real woman to care for you." As if I'm not enough. As if everything I've done isn't enough. A flicker passed through Samir's dull eyes, a question, a doubt. Zoya noticed. She tightened her grip on his hand and looked away, letting a single tear fall down her cheek. "I didn't want to tell you," she whispered. "I didn't want to upset you. But she said you'd be better off without me. That she could take you to her house and nurse you back to health herself. As if you were her child again, not my husband." Samir's fingers moved slightly, brushing against hers. Zoya squeezed his hand back, tenderly, then looked at the door. Closed, bolted from the inside. Just how she wanted it. Downstairs, Alma had come earlier. She always brought soup or boiled eggs, or fruits cut lovingly into bite-sized pieces. But Zoya never let them reach Samir. She met Alma at the door with excuses. "He's sleeping, he's vomiting, he's too tired." Then she'd accept the food with a smile and throw it in the bin before climbing the stairs again. Zoya wanted control over everything Samir consumed, food, medicine, even words. And day by day, her version of the truth became the only one he heard. "She told me," Zoya said now, "that maybe you got sick because of the way I live. That it's my fault. That I've cursed you." She let her voice crack, turned away from him slightly, and let the silence fill the room like fog. Samir stared at the ceiling. Slowly, as if it cost him great effort, he whispered, "Alma wouldn't say that." Zoya turned back, hurt playing across her face like a well-rehearsed scene. "So you think I'm lying?" Samir closed his eyes. "No, just doesn't sound like her." Zoya took a shaky breath. "You're right. She's your mother. Of course you'll believe her. It's okay. I'll just keep trying." Samir's hand twitched again, but he said nothing more. That night, when Alma came again, Zoya didn't answer the door. She sat on the floor upstairs, back against the bed, and listened to the knocking. Listened to the voice outside calling her name. Pleading. When the knocking finally stopped, she looked up at Samir, who was drifting in and out of a fevered sleep. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small bottle of syrup. Just 2 spoonfuls. Something that dulled the senses. "It'll help you rest," she said, feeding it to him drop by drop. "Don't think too much. Just trust me."
And he did.
Because she was always there. The next morning, Alma returned, with a male relative this time, her cousin's son, tall and firm-voiced. "We want to see him," he said at the door. Zoya stepped out, closed the door behind her, and forced a polite smile. He's too sick today. The doctor advised minimal contact. He's sleeping now. He's been sleeping for days, the man said. Zoya nodded, biting her lip. I know. But please understand he needs peace. Inside the room, Samir stirred. His mind clouded, body heavy. He could barely open his eyes, but a voice echoed in the back of his mind. Amma's voice, calling out his name. He tried to respond, but his throat was dry, his limbs useless. And Zoya returned just in time, closing the door softly behind her, locking it again. She came to his side and placed a hand on his chest. Don't worry. They won't bother you. I won't let them. He looked at her with confusion.
Fear.
But she kissed his forehead and smiled. There's no one left but me, John. Just me. And I'll never leave you. The ceiling was cracked and faded. Samir stared at it every day, hour after hour, because there was little else he could do. His body had betrayed him, paralyzed from the waist down after a sudden infection doctors couldn't fully explain. His voice, reduced to whispers. His limbs, heavy and numb. But his eyes still worked. And they saw everything. Especially her. Zoya moved gracefully around the room, adjusting curtains, pouring soup into a bowl, setting it on the side table. She smiled often, soft, warm, devoted. But her eyes told a different story. Samir couldn't explain it, not even to himself. But something about her gaze no longer felt safe. Those eyes he had once drowned in, those same deep, dark eyes that used to light up when he walked into a room, now held shadows.
Secrets.
Something darker than sorrow. He blinked slowly as she turned toward him. You're awake, Zoya said, her tone cheerful. Good. I made lentil soup. Your favorite. He tried to speak, but only a raspy breath came out. She leaned down, bringing the spoon close to his lips. He opened his mouth slightly, allowing her to feed him. She smiled again. But those eyes, they didn't match the curve of her lips. Everyone's asking about you, she said between spoonfuls. Your mother called again. She wants to visit. I told her you were sleeping. I know you need rest. Samir's brow twitched. He wanted her to let his mother in. He hadn't seen her in days. Maybe weeks? He couldn't tell anymore. Time blurred inside this room. Zoya placed the spoon back in the bowl. You want to know what she said, don't you? She asked softly, almost amused. She thinks I'm not doing enough. That maybe if she were here, you'd get better faster. She leaned closer, eyes locking with his. Do you think that too? He didn't blink, didn't nod. But something inside him stirred, the tiniest flicker of doubt. Zoya looked away quickly, clearing her throat. You know I've always loved you. I'm here, aren't I? Every day. Every hour. Who else stayed? Samir stared at her. His gaze moved slowly from her lips to her eyes again. And there it was, that flicker. That veil. He remembered a time, just months ago, when she cried over his shoulder because her father had called her selfish. That night, her tears soaked his shirt, and he whispered to her that she was the most loving person he had ever met.
He believed it then.
But now, she barely flinched when she pushed extra pills into his mouth. Now, she told his mother to stay away, said the doctor had ordered no visitors. Now, she left the room when she cried. He watched her walk to the cupboard and fumble with a drawer. Her hand trembled as she pulled out a small white bottle. She paused, looked back at him, and smiled again. It's time for your medicine, she said, voice syrupy smooth. He wanted to scream. Not with anger, with fear. Something about the way she clutched the bottle, about the way her hand tightened around the cap, made him feel like a stranger in his own home. She poured out 2 pills, placed them gently in his mouth, and followed with water. Her fingers brushed his lips. There, she said. That should help you sleep. He stared at her. She stared back and blinked. A tear fell from her left eye. Guilt?
No.
Not quite. Something else.
Panic.
She looked away too fast, stood up too quickly. I'll be downstairs. Call if you need anything. But he couldn't call. He hadn't called in days. Not since his voice cracked in the middle of the night, and no one came. When she left the room, he tried again, his throat raw, voice thin as a whisper. Zoya. No reply. His eyes burned. Not from tears. From the helplessness. He stared at the door, hoping, praying, she'd come back, just for one more look. But it wasn't her he wanted to see. It was the truth. And the truth never came back through that door. Instead, she sent a nurse the next day. A quiet girl with nervous hands and distant eyes. The girl didn't talk much, but she watched. And Samir watched her, too. Because in her silence, he sensed something different, something real. She didn't lie with her eyes. The wind whistled through the broken window pane as Arshad lay on the wooden cot, his body too weak to even lift the quilt that had slipped from his shoulder. His lungs burned with each breath. The infection had taken its toll. But the pain in his chest wasn't just from illness, it was from what he felt slipping away, piece by piece. Everything. Everything he had built. Everything he had trusted. Especially her. Roxana entered the room with slow, deliberate steps, a cup of hot tea in one hand and a stack of folded papers in the other. She smiled when she saw him awake. "You're up," she said sweetly. "I brought tea. The medicine works better after it." Arshad blinked slowly, struggling to focus. Her voice was calm, affectionate like always. But something had shifted. The warmth felt artificial now, like light filtered through stained glass. "Here," she said, sitting beside him, lifting his head gently and placing the cup to his lips. Small sips. He drank, though the bitterness in his mouth had little to do with the tea. "Good," she whispered, brushing his forehead with her fingers. "Everything's under control. You don't need to worry about anything. I'm handling it all." He gave the faintest nod. His voice hadn't returned since the last fever. Only soft groans and a tear or two that escaped when no one was looking. She placed the cup down and for a moment just sat there, her eyes scanning him, her mind somewhere far beyond the room. Then, slowly, she opened the folded papers. "Some documents came from the city," she said casually. "Just formalities. I signed them already. I know what you would have wanted." He blinked. She turned the paper, so he couldn't see the words. "You trust me, don't you?" He blinked again. A lie wrapped in love. That's what it sounded like. Roxana stood up and smoothed her dress. "I'll be going into town tomorrow. We need to talk to the lawyer again. That big field near the canal, the one you were going to lease next season, the buyer is offering more than we expected." I told him yes. He tried to move. Even a finger. Anything. But the illness had made him a prisoner in his own body. He had told her once, months ago, asterisk. The rain tapped lightly on the tin roof, a soothing rhythm that once brought peace to Fahad's heart. Now, lying still on a worn mattress, he could only watch the ceiling through half-lidded eyes. His body ached from weeks of sickness, his limbs weak, but his mind, though slow, remained aware. He blinked slowly, trying to gather the strength to speak, but his throat burned, and words stayed buried. Beside him, Roxana moved quietly. She adjusted the curtain slightly, letting in filtered light, then turned and gave him a soft smile. Her eyes glimmered with care, and her voice, when she spoke, was honeyed. "Don't worry, John. I've taken care of everything.
Rest.
You don't need to think about the outside world." He wanted to believe her, and for a while he did. After all, she was the one who bathed him, fed him, dealt with the visitors, and brought the medicines. His brother stopped coming weeks ago, and their land agent hadn't been seen since the day he fell ill. Yet Roxana stayed, day and night. Fahad had once handled everything himself. The land, the crops, the house, it had all been his domain. But now, he couldn't even hold a pen. Roxana had taken over, slowly, tenderly, in a way that seemed natural. She told him the wheat was doing fine, that the tenants had paid their dues, that there were no new letters from the bank. But what she didn't say hung heavier in the room than the silence between them. One evening, while she thought he was asleep, she spoke on the phone. Her voice was hushed but urgent. "Just one more paper to sign," she said. "He won't even notice. He's too weak now." Fahad's heart pounded, weak and desperate. He tried to move, to rise, to speak, but his muscles failed him, and the effort left him breathless. Later that week, she brought a document and gently placed it on a board across his chest. "Just sign here," she said sweetly, guiding the pen into his fingers. "It's for the land tax, remember?" His fingers shook, but she steadied them, wrapped her hand around his, and dragged the pen in place. She smiled again and kissed his forehead. "Good boy," she whispered. He tried to read it, but his vision was blurry. Something inside screamed to stop, to ask, but her smile, so calm, so convincing, soothed him into silence again. That night, in the next room, he heard her laugh. Not the soft laugh she saved for him, but a sharp, careless one. "It's done," she said. "The big piece. Near the canal. Signed and sealed. He doesn't even know." The ache in his chest was worse than the illness. That land, his father's land, the one he swore he'd never sell.
Gone.
His world shrank in that moment. He wasn't just sick now, he was powerless. She came in minutes later, humming, holding a warm bowl of soup.
"Eat a little, John," she said.
"You need your strength." He turned his face away. She sat on the edge of the bed, her expression unchanged. "Everything I do," she whispered, "I do for us." But he finally saw it, the careful weaving of lies, the soft betrayal hidden in her every kind gesture. She hadn't taken care of things. She had taken them. The small room smelled of incense and damp earth. Outside, the wind rustled through the dry leaves, carrying faint whispers of distant prayers from the mosque. Inside, Rania sat quietly beside her husband's bed, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her eyes were fixed on the fragile shape beneath the thin blanket, a man she once loved fiercely, now reduced to breath and weakness. She moved her lips in silent prayer, a soft murmur barely audible over the slow rise and fall of his chest. "Ya Allah, grant him strength. Heal him, protect him." But deep inside, her heart beat a secret rhythm, one that didn't match the words she spoke. She didn't want him to get well. Not yet. Not while his questions hovered on the horizon, waiting to break the fragile peace she had built. She had told him she was his strength, his anchor, the one who would carry him through the darkness. And he believed her. Even now, his eyes flickered open when she whispered promises of better days, of healing, of forgiveness. But those promises were lies. The truth was buried under years of fear and regret. She prayed, yes, but not for recovery. She prayed for time to hold him just a little longer in this state, to keep his anger from rising again, to silence the questions that might undo her carefully woven world. Her fingers brushed his forehead, damp with sweat. He shivered beneath the thin sheet, coughing softly. She reached for a glass of water and fed him slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. "You're safe here," she said. "I'm with you." He tried to smile but could only manage a weak twitch. His trust was still there, shining like a flicker in the dark. But as the night deepened, she sat back and watched the slow beat of his heart. The prayer beads in her hand slipped through her fingers. She was praying, but not for healing. She was praying for silence, for stillness, for the day when he would stop asking, stop wondering, stop fighting. And for her, the woman who had stayed beside him not out of love, but out of fear.